All right, everybody, we're back. Part 2 of The Real Deal, telling the truth, educating people in the land about the truth about taxes, the origin of money, the stock market, the people that run the show. Heck, listen up, because I'm going to name some names later on. But we're at Part 2 right now. We ended up at Part 1 with the American Revolution, where we kicked Britain's butt. Say, take that, Britain, and then we didn't pay taxes anymore. We didn't really pay taxes until 1789. The Constitution was 1787, and the only thing we did was we had some taxes and tariffs for certain items. They were very low, and the reason that we had those is because we had to cover the cost of the Revolutionary War. The war lasted a long time, and the country didn't have any money. It cost a lot of lives, a lot of labor, a lot of loss. So we had to do a little something. And in 1791, the United States had a whiskey tax because apparently whiskey's popular. Always has been. And they're like, you're going to drink it, we're going to make a little money off you. But it wasn't that much. It wasn't even near as much as what the Brits were charging. So they also started taxing slaves. All right? They started taxing homes, and they started taxing slaves. But all of that was to cover all the cost of the Revolutionary War. And the taxes were very low. It was not excessive. It was basically like you could afford it. You're a working man. Here's how much you make. Just a little bit here and there. Now, it didn't last very long either. They didn't charge those taxes very long. Those were temporary taxes. They didn't last long at all. And then, in 1812, we came into war again. And again, they had to charge some taxes to cover the War of 1812. And that only ran for 5 years, from 1812 to 1817 in the United States. USA, baby. And those were the same prices, very low again. Those were the same as the 1789 taxes. Now we're talking, over 20 years later, the taxes were still low because they knew people hated taxes. They knew that was why we fought the freaking war to begin with, was over high taxes. Now, Benjamin Franklin, and you're going to hear all these lies if you go on Google and look it up, and, if you talk to people and stuff. Benjamin Franklin, half the things they said he did wrong, he didn't. Half the things they said he said bad, he didn't. Probably most of the things, I should say. Franklin was a patriot. He loved this country. But he said it best when Britain was ruling everything, that the two things you cannot avoid in life is death and taxes. And that was the truth back then. But then after 1817, we went back to the same old thing. There were no taxes anymore. And when there was very minimal taxes on certain things, very minimal. Like if you bought a home, you had to pay a little tax on that, just to cover like the documentations, the paperwork, things like that. And for some reason, America got by. We were getting by pretty good. We built roads. We built the cities up. I mean, big buildings were getting up there. A lot of it was, you had a lot of rich people. And, it's not like now where they say, well, we want a tax break. We want this. We want that. We want the taxpayers to give us some money so we can build this factory and make billions more dollars. It's a scam, man. We'll get to that later on. But anyway, it wasn't like that. These guys were like, yeah, I'm rich. I'm going to build this factory. And I'm going to let these guys produce whatever there. And they put all the money. They paid for it and everything, because there were no taxes. How we got by, I don't know. But we did okay. Now, the first federal income tax came in 1862. And the reason they put that out there was because of the war between the states, the Civil War, whatever you want to call it, the Southern Rebellion, the Northern, ground advantage, whatever you want to call it. Now, the Southerners, this was a national federal tax. Southerners weren't paying it. They're like, screw you. We ain't paying that, because they were against, the North. And, that's a big divisive thing going on right there, too, between the North and the South. There was a lot involved in this, a lot more than most people will tell you. They say it was all about slavery. It wasn't. But we'll get to that some other day. But that was in effect for only 10 years. 1872, they repealed the federal income tax on that. Everybody had to pay a percentage of their wealth and their income into federal taxes to fund the war. Now, what happened? I don't know. What happened, man? 10 years and then boom, no more taxes. And you know what? The North started rebuilding. The South, because the North got some battles done. South was rebuilding. And that was a lot of the money that they got in those taxes was going to help the South rebuild. And they were doing a lot of good things down there to help those people up. Now, what that was is they would charge you 3% on income up to 10 grand. So if you made $10,000 a year, you only had to pay 3% of it in federal income tax. So let's say you made $10,000. You had to pay 3%. That's $300. I mean, and back then, if you made $10,000, that's millionaire money. But that's nothing. 3%. The average American now pays 15%. That's average. And that's low income average. We got people paying a lot higher than that are considered middle class, And so, and here's the thing. The country was basically giving a lot of money to the South to help them rebuild. And if you made over 10 grand, so anything over $10,000 in a year, you paid 5%. So that's $500. It might seem like a lot of money, but back then, $10,000 was worth, oh man, that's $250,000, give or take a little bit. Probably a little more, That's a lot of freaking money. Any of y'all listening to me, do you make $250,000 a year? Just wondering. Because if you do, I know you're paying about 40% of that in federal income taxes. I know that for a fact. The average income back during the war between the states was $350 a year. For the average working man, the average farmer, your average person. That's nothing. So $350 a year. So that's $10, basically. I mean, back then it seemed like a lot of money, but it wasn't even close to what we pay today. And what do we get for our taxes? Look around you. What do you get? Tell you what I get, man. We'll go to that later on. Now, there was a lot of crazy stuff going on. 1867, they quit it. They're like, okay, we don't need the federal taxes anymore. We've built this stuff up. We've done really good. A lot of businesses are going off and stuff. But because of the war between the states, the advantage was to the North. Now, a lot of y'all don't know this, but the slave trade was big time supported by the North and many companies up here. Many banks started and were funded by the slave trade. They used to use slavery and the people, the slaves, as collateral. You could say, well, if I miss a payment, you get this slave, because they'd turn around and be able to sell them. And slaves were not cheap. Only the rich people owned them. And all these companies out there, like U.S. Bank, Wells Fargo, all these companies made millions off of the slave trade. And many of y'all supporting them today. That's why I don't support a lot of companies, because I don't deal with anybody that's dealt with the Nazis. I don't deal with anybody that dealt with the slave trade, anybody that made labor, illegal labor, slave labor of any kind, child labor. I don't deal with those companies. Trust me, there's a big list of them. I'll come out and talk to you about it one day. Make sure you tune in and listen, all right? So I'll educate you, because I got a moral compass and I got a conscience, and the whole world needs that, because these companies made millions in unfair labor practices with slavery and nasty things, man. So if you support them, you might as well have supported slavery. That's how I look at it. Now, these companies and these banks were buying up everything in the South because the people had no money down there. They were hurting. They lost everything. You had people that were farmers, just regular old farmers, man. And some of them might have been, your average farmer did not own a slave. He couldn't afford it. The reason most people resented the slaves wasn't because they were black, wasn't because these people were racist. It's because these guys, the slaves, were taking their jobs from them, basically. And they hated the rich people because of it. Because old Farmer Johansson down the road there, he was taking it and he was making all his money, and he could sell his cotton cheaper than you could. Or he could sell any of his crops cheaper because he didn't have to pay any labor and you did. So that's why they resented him. And all these big companies came down and they took advantage. And they saw a lot of these guys who were hurting after the war and had to sell their companies. They had to give up everything they owned. They had to give up their property. They had to give up a lot of stuff. These big companies from the north came and swooped down there. And they were taking advantage of everybody. And they were hurting people, leaving people homeless and displaced, And there was still slavery going on. Don't let them fool you. Slavery went on for years and years and years, people. And that's sad, but it's the truth. Because these companies didn't care about that. And trust me, a lot of people in the North didn't give a damn about that either. They didn't care. Okay, so these companies went down there. And they started buying up these other companies that might have been their competitors. What they would do is they buy them up and shut them down. Because it's cheaper. Because let's say this guy's got a factory going on and he's making some steel. Well, not steel, but, some metals, some stoves, things like that. And this company up here from the North's gotten all this money. Well, this guy's, he can't really compete with them, but his product is better. And people are loyal, and they're going to him. So they said, tell you what, old Joe Brown, we're going to buy you out. And he would, because he needed the money, because he was hurting, trying to get back on his feet. And then they shut it down. So the only one you could buy from was them. They created monopolies. They created giant corporations. They took over everything. They did what we have to deal with today. Look around you. Every day somebody's buying somebody out. All the time. And what does the government do? Oh, yeah, well, we have a problem with that, but how much of a cut do we get? All right, then, it's all good. You got all these crooks in Washington, D.C. and around the country getting tips on it, doing the insider trading, but nobody says a word to them. These corporations back then were creating monopolies. They were hurting the little guy, and that's how it always goes, and that's what we're dealing with today, too. We'll get to more of that in the future episodes. But there was one man who stood up, and he was from Ohio. And he was a senator. He was a Republican senator from Ohio. And he said, this is wrong. He said, this is wrong. We should not let these corporations take over. We should not let these corporations take over and do what they're doing. They're hurting people. They're hurting the little guy, and we don't need that. This is America. We fought wars to be free from oppressive taxpayers. We fought wars to be away from oppressive countries. We fought wars to be away from the corporations that control the world. So he stood up and he passed the rule. He passed the law. Tried to. And his name was John Sherman, Ohio boy. He wanted a free market. He wanted everybody to be able to compete legally across the board. He did not like monopolies. And he passed a law, the Sherman Antitrust Act. And it predominantly passed because a lot of people, even the Southern Democrats, were like, you know what? This is all right, man, because it's going to help us. And let's just say that, the parties have never changed, people. Don't let them fool you. Don't let them fool you. But the Southern Democrats back then were like, you know what? This is going to help us. So, yeah, we're for it. Republicans, most of them, they weren't bought off and paid off like they are now. Like all these politicians are. Not all of them. I'd say probably 80, 90% of them are a bunch of crooks. But anyway, so he passed it. He passed the Sherman Antitrust Act. And it made it to where you couldn't, if you were a huge corporation, you couldn't go buy up everybody. You couldn't. You had to have a legitimate reason. Now, if a guy was going out of business, you could go and buy his business. But you couldn't just go and take over that business because you wanted to put him out of business. Also, that applied to the banks because the banks are nothing but corporations too. And they've always been that way. Banks control a lot of our economy. They control a lot of the monopolies we have today. They control a lot of things, and they've always been that way. So he shut it down because companies were buying up the competition. Banks were buying these people out too, and people didn't have a problem with it that had money. But the poor people, the working man, people like me and you that work for a living, blood, sweat, and tears, man. People that hurt themselves over the years, man. I've been working 45 years. I've been paying into federal income taxes, man. What am I going to get back someday? Squat. Anyway, these people were hurting bad, man. And they were like, all right, man. They started shutting these people down, putting people out of work. And there was a lot of flack that he passed this. The rich folks didn't like that. Rich folks didn't like that at all. But the Antitrust Act passed, and it took effect. And guess what? The little man started making the money. Little corporations started rising up. A lot of great little companies came out of nowhere. People that could bake bread all of a sudden were able to sell it in the store. And then the next thing you know, it's becoming a big company. And the other companies couldn't compete because their products usually sucked. Because it wasn't made with love. It wasn't made with good recipes. It wasn't made with care. It was all about money. Where you got a lot of people in this world that they don't, they're making money. They want to make money, but they care more about what the people think about their product. And the Sherman Antitrust Act helped out a lot of people. And you had a lot of government didn't like it. A lot of politicians didn't like it. Of course, the rich people hated it. They hated it. They resented it. They said it was illegal. Politicians said, nope, ain't going to happen. You ain't turning that over. And then it started to get a little corrupt. People started looking the other way because there were a lot of corrupt politicians, a lot of corrupt banks, a lot of corrupt businesses, and they started looking the other way on a lot of this stuff. And then a man came along out of nowhere. And I know a lot of people might not like him, but this man did a lot for his country. He wasn't perfect. No politician is. None of them are. I'll be straight up with you. None of them are. But there was a man named Teddy Roosevelt. A lot of the politicians didn't like Teddy. A lot of the people didn't like Teddy at all because not the people liked him, but the politicians, the people in charge, the power-hungry nut jobs, they didn't like old Teddy because Teddy told it like it was. Teddy was a working man. He suffered in his life. He suffered a lot. He went through hell for most of his life. So he knew what it was like. And he wanted the working man to succeed. So he got in there. And he was the president from 01 to 1909. And they didn't like that, man. He got in there after his assassination. So his first term was just a couple years, but he got reelected. And like I said, a lot of politicians didn't like him. They didn't want him to be vice president. It worked out for him. Somebody was looking out for him. And he got in there, and you know what he started doing? He enforced the Sherman Antitrust Act all over again. He was the trust buster. He wasn't going to let these banks take over. He wasn't going to let them shut people down. He did everything he could in his power to keep the corruption out of government and out of the public. He wanted the working man to succeed. He cared about the farmers. He cared about health care for people. He cared about the people. Heck, Teddy Roosevelt took a bullet one time when he was campaigning. Took a bullet. And it lodged in his chest. Didn't go all the way in because he had something in his pocket to stop that. But he told everybody, I've been shot, but I got something to say. How many people you know going to take a bullet and do anything like that? Heck, nowadays people trip and hurt their toes. They're like, I got to go to the hospital for a month. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt didn't play no crap. Teddy Roosevelt is my favorite president. I'm not going to lie to you. I know he wasn't perfect. Nobody was. But he enforced the Sherman Antitrust Act. He was in charge of the square deal. He wanted a square deal for everybody. He supported the working man. He felt if you ran a company, you better pay the working man what he's worth. That's where unions came from, because they had to step up because these companies were taking advantage. Like I said, they were buying everybody else, and they controlled the whole industry. And he wasn't playing that. He's like, no, you can't buy him out. No, you can't take him over. And it wasn't just a legitimate buyout like, hey, he's selling us. No, they kept the businesses down. They destroyed things. They did all kinds of stuff to keep these people from making money. It's like, hey, they tried to burn the buildings down and stuff like that so they'd have to sell. These people are corrupt, man, and they're all rich. And Teddy wasn't playing that. And the rich man hated him. The rich man hated old Teddy, man. And he did the square deal, like I said. And you ever hear of J.P. Morgan? Back in that day, he was one of the richest men in America. And he tried to do all kinds of crazy illegal stuff. We call it, today it's legal and legitimate, political-wise. Back then it was highly illegal. And JP got caught. And Teddy stood up to him. He said, hey, man, you ain't going to do that. Not on my watch. And he made sure other politicians did the same thing. And they had people looking out for each other. The corruption dropped because it wasn't going to happen. Teddy knew it. And Teddy did a wonderful job, man. They were taking farmers' lands from them. They would go and ruin a farmer's crop, so the farmer would have to sell his land. Then they would take his land and they'd grow their own crop. Or they'd build something on it. They'd get it for dirt cheap because the farmer lost everything. Because, the banker come around and told the farmer, hey, man, you owe me some money. Because he's not the farmer's friend. Most banks are not the farmer's friend. They don't give a damn about the farmers or the working man. When y'all going to get that through your head, man? Yeah, I'm going to preach to you, man. But he stopped them. He stood up to the corporations. Next thing you know, the farmers were prospering. American farmers were prospering like they used to, like they should be now. There was no regulation saying you have to charge this much. You can't charge this much. Guy wanted to sell this for 50 cents and you're willing to pay it. That money went to the farmer. Good for him. Nowadays, it doesn't work that way. He didn't mind big business, but he wanted them to be honest. He wanted them to keep the jobs here in the United States. Oh, boy, you don't hear that much anymore. And he's like, you're going to be a big business? Cool. But you're going to be honest with us, man. The coal miners went on strike because they were being treated like dirt, unsafe working conditions, all kinds of bad stuff. People were dying left and right. So what did Teddy do? He helped them. He stood up for them. He's like, these people need to get paid. Look what they're doing. You guys couldn't do that. You won't even go into mine. He made it. He did it. He helped people out. You don't get that in politics too much anymore. And like you got people nowadays that want to help and take care of others and step up and help. What happens to them? When you care, you get criticized. When you try to help, you get criticized. Teddy got criticized big time. A lot of people didn't like him. Media didn't like him. Who owns the media? The corporations, just like today. Teddy didn't care. He made the corrupt railroads. They were doing everything they could to take over everything. He made them honest. He's like, no, you can't do that. No, that's not your property. You can't build there. That's his property. That's that railroad's property. Leave them alone. You can't take his stuff. He enforced rules. He enforced rules on the food and the drugs. He was the one that passed laws to where, then it's kind of gross, but there's only a certain percentage of rat feces you can have in food. That sticks today, by the way, because back then, if a rat fell in the meat chipper, you're eating it. They didn't care. Flies got into anything, they didn't care. But you know what? He said, no, we're going to change that. We're not going to have that. You're not going to do that anymore. So it's a very low percentage. I don't know how real it is nowadays, but he made it to where you couldn't do that anymore. He started cracking down. Drugs? Nope. Those drugs got to get legitimately checked by doctors and medical people that I pick, Teddy said. He cracked down on that stuff, man. And these corporations hated him. They hated him so much, man. And he had positive foreign policy. Countries loved us. He did trades with these other countries. The other countries loved us. He had good positive foreign energy, man. They liked us. They're like, yeah, this guy's all right, man. So he was able to run for a third term. because, at this time, there was no term limits. George Washington was the first one to say no term limits because he said, no, 2 terms is enough because we don't need a king. And Roosevelt, in this first term, was because of the assassination. So technically, he was, even in today's laws, he would have been entitled to a 3rd term. So they weren't going to let that happen. Old Teddy wasn't going to get that term, man. So he had to run the Republicans. They wouldn't even give him the candidacy. He had to run under a 3rd party, the Bull Moose Party. They wouldn't give him the nomination. They wouldn't let him in. So it was sad. It was sad. Now, the primary in 1912 went across the country, right? And Teddy was running on the 3rd party. But the Republican primary, he won that. He won that. People wanted him to be president. He predominantly won the Republican candidacy, but they didn't care, and they wouldn't give it to him. So again, 3rd party. And when it came to election, the rich people did anything they could to keep him out of there. Probably cheated. Election cheating has been going on forever, but they wouldn't let him. But he still finished 2nd. He beat the Republican candidate, and he barely lost to Woodrow Wilson. Now, I'm going to sign off, and part 3 is going to be coming real soon. And we're going to go off on Woodrow Wilson. This is a man, if you want to call him that did the opposite of everything Teddy Roosevelt did. This man is a corrupt politician. So when I come back for part 3 of this series, man, and I hope you're fired up as I am, and I hope you're listening, I hope you're learning, and I hope you like it. I'm just trying to educate people, man. Just trying to give you the real deal. Peace and love, everybody. I'll be back real soon. Part 3 starting with old Woodrow Wilson. Now there's somebody you want to hear about too. Oh boy. That's one of the beginnings of the downfall of this great country. Peace. You'll hear from me soon.